Welcome to the Secrets of College Planning. I'm your host, Anthony Uva, and today we're going to get some insight into the gap year. My guest today is Holly Bull. She is the president of the Center of Interim Programs, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for having me on again.
Yeah. So last time you came on, you talked about your college career and your business. This time you're coming on and actually have a whole PowerPoint presentation.
Yep, with the virtual format that allows for a whole different look here.
Yeah, so take it away from here.
Thank you again, Anthony, for introducing me, and just a little more background on who I am and my part in the gap year process. I'm very biased on a personal and a professional level because I've been steeped in the gap year field almost since my beginnings. Just given how my family moved around quite a bit, because my father was a headmaster of private schools in the U.S. and abroad, and he always had an idea for something like this, the gap year option. He was collecting program ideas back in the 60s, and then he started the Center for Interim Programs here in Princeton, New Jersey in 1980, and that's when I was graduating actually from Princeton High School here, 2 years here, and took my own gap year before college, and I also took a gap year after my sophomore year in college. And then I've been on the counseling end of this work for about 30 years. All I do is gap year counseling. I'm also a gap year parent. I have a stepdaughter who took a gap year before college, and I have a daughter who's graduating this year from high school who's planning for gap year now. So I've been running the Center for Interim Programs, since early 2000, and we've been working with pretty steady stream of gap year students, and as I said, including this past year, even with the COVID restrictions. So this, just to give you a quick look of my own gap year, the first one that I took, here I am at 17, heading off to Hawaii. My friends headed off to college, and I was on a plane to Oahu to do aquaculture research, with an eye to becoming a marine biologist. And obviously that's not what I'm doing. So after a couple of months, I thought, man, I have the patience for this research. This is not something that I really think I want to pursue as a major in college or work in the world. Really helpful to know, before heading down that track. It also was great not to have homework and just do hands-on work and work alongside older adults in this process. This picture just gives you a nice visceral hit of hands-on learning. You're not sitting in front of a computer watching a video of this 8-foot squid that we pulled up inadvertently on a University of Hawaii research project that I got on board. But you're on the deck of a boat in the sun, watching this creature come up from the depths. And I think that's the missing piece for many students, is this hands-on learning and the excitement about learning, and which really comes often from the hands-on experience. The second part of my year, I went to Greece, and this was an academic cultural study program with peers studying modern Greek language and history and poetry. Pretty much everything we were studying related directly to this world around us. And that also was a missing piece for me in school, where I go from math class to history to Spanish. It's like, how does this stuff connect? All this stuff we've been cramming into our head all these years, how does it relate to the world around us? So I hit college with way more vigor after this gap year, and especially after this program in Greece, where I got excited about learning again for its own sake. And I took all that excitement and momentum into UVA. Now, for me as a counselor, the core value of this process that I've been doing now for 30 years with over 3,600 students, we work with over 8,000 since we started, is just the shift away from, I have to do this, I'm supposed to do that, all these directives coming at us when we're young. And you're really starting with this core question and like leading from the core pivot of who am I? What am I, interested in? And then I choose and own what I'm up to. And that's so much part of the gap year process. And that's really the beginning of personal power. If you can learn what it feels like to choose and create your life at 17, 18, 19, that's going to stand you in really good stead no matter what you do, college and beyond. So what is a gap year? It really is just this chance to explore interests and skills, typically between high school and college or during college, usually around 3 to 9 months, very much a year on. People say, oh, I'm going to take a year off. Baloney, you are so on because you have to be. You're stepping into things that are really different from what you've done before, and you tend to be very much alive. And this is part of your education. This is not a break from your education, as far as I'm concerned. So who takes a gap year? Anybody who's interested. Really, it's mostly students, high school students, college students, but also older adults. I mean, we work with all ages and always have, since we started in 1980. And the process isn't so very different. You're just still always starting with these core interests that you have and then exploring with the hands-on options. And it's really for all different types of learning styles. Students with learning differences, high-powered students, it just runs the gamut. You do not have to be good at anything to take a gap year and explore. It's all for learning. So lots of benefits here. I mean, obviously, if you're going towards something you want to do, you're going to be more self-motivated. And that's also a big shift for students and parents, seeing their children, you know, getting excited about something that they've chosen to do and owning the process. And you're practicing that for a full year. This is a big one. I see a lot of students who come into my office just fried. You know, they've done the work, they've worked really hard. There are way more pressures. I'm seeing it in my daughter right now. No matter what I tell her, she's steeped in this crazy pace. And so beyond having just a summer to fill back up, you know, a full year, I think, really gives students a chance to rejuvenate in a way that a summer often doesn't really provide them. And that affects how they land in college. And then I mentioned the relevance of studies to the world. How is what I'm doing relevant? Students definitely come away with more financial awareness. You know, they're budgeting, they're thinking about budgeting, and that is a great skill. And then everything you do on a gap year goes on a resume. You know, you're garnering skills, life skills that are going to be probably more useful for you in the work world beyond college than many classes in terms of what kind of goes into the bones or what you're drawing on. And this helps you get jobs. And then if you can land in college with more clarity about what you want to focus on, or if you're heading right from gap year into work, you're going in with more clarity about what you want to do. I mean, I had a young man who didn't want to go to college, and he said, I just want to do something in the recording arts, got trained in that, worked at an internship in Philadelphia at a recording studio, and they hired him on. So it gave him a direct, you know, line to work. Most of our students usually are planning to go to college and go to college. It's very rare that someone gets derailed by a gap year in terms of their plans for college. And then, as I said, you know, if you have this skill set that you are accruing during gap time, it's easier for you to step into a job post-college, or you might have had already a half step into the working world through your gap year. You know, my stepdaughter Samantha did an internship in Dublin in the last part of her gap year at 19. She said, I'm pretty sure I got my job with IBM based on that internship I did in Ireland. She said, that's all we talked about during the interview. And they were really impressed that she'd handled herself independently and did a nice job with the placement, and how she showed up as a human being was different. I mean, she said they pretty much told her, Samantha, your gap years would help you get this job. So how do gap year students perform in college? Here's the myth. All right, they're going to lose academic momentum if they step away from formal studies, or maybe they won't go back. The reality is these students on average are performing at higher levels than non-gap year students. And here's the research. This is what I've been hearing anecdotally for years from families, but now higher ed is starting to pay attention and tracking these students. So this is Bob Clagett's research. He was in Harvard admissions for years, and then dean of admission at Middlebury College for about 7 years. And he started to track the GPAs in blue that you see here of the gap year students. And what he saw is that their GPAs were higher. It wasn't a huge pool of students, but it was statistically significant that these students were outperforming how they were expected to do based on their own academic history, you know, like coming into Middlebury, and outperforming a lot of their peers. And most of them hadn't done anything academic during their gap year, but they were still doing better academically when they landed in college. Then he ran the numbers for UNC Chapel Hill. Same results, even more dramatic. GPAs of the gap year students were higher than their peers. Colorado College, Mark Hatch is in admissions there. He was also in Harvard admissions. He's dean of admission at CC now. I've been on lots of gap year panels with these folks, and he was saying the same thing at a big NACAC conference. These GPAs are higher of the Colorado College students who take a gap year. Young men who take gap time are outperforming non-gap year female peers, and they're way outperforming non-gap year male peers. I mean, just again, that's statistically unusual because young men aren't doing often as well as the young women on a GPA level. And again, that level of maturity is going up, and just the time before they step into college makes a big difference for young men. He said these students are leaders on campus. They don't have the same behavioral issues and dramas. You know, roommate issues don't derail them. And they finish college in 4 years or fewer, you know, compared to the average, which is 5 to 6 years. He said, we want to see 20% of our freshman class have taken a gap year. I think they're about 12% now. They've also become a research hub for gap year in the last few years. And so they're looking at the mental health of gap year students. And what they're finding is that anxiety levels are going down. Again, it makes sense if a student has a year to go do things they want to do and they're happy. They're bringing that into freshman year. Depression levels going down. This is something we've seen as well for students who are suffering from these two things. And he also said we're seeing that there's a lower number of disciplinary incidents in college, especially among young men, when they've done a gap year. Some of the pitfalls and challenges. So, you don't want to ideally force a gap year on someone. That belies the whole power of choosing. And you want to make sure you're landing in placements that are well run. So there are definitely duds out there. You want to do your due diligence. And as you're looking at a full gap year, if you're not doing one program the whole time, there are probably a couple different things you're going to be doing. So you want to make sure you don't have too many gaps during your gap year. So the challenges are, it does take work. There are more moving parts. College is all set up for you and is a pretty much of a known entity. But gap year, the students are changing, plans are changing. You're rolling with the unexpected. Certainly last year with COVID, none of us really knew how it was going to play out. I can tell you that it's really gratifying to stand here in February saying pretty much all of our students, 160 students, about, I would say 100 of them were stepping into, or more actually, stepping into hands-on programs last fall with peers, leaders doing, in small groups where they could quarantine them easily. And it was a success. And it was in the US and abroad, some places abroad. So even though the options weren't as broad as normal, people were still able to step into these experiences and the benefits are the same. And right now students are doing internships, they're doing service projects, disaster relief work, in particular programs that are able to quarantine them and make it work. So when I say program, it can mean anything from the facilitated group options that are out there specifically set up for gap year students. So these connect you with a peer group and leaders. They run 3 to 9 months, typically US and abroad. And many of these are the ones that created domestic options for students last fall because they couldn't go abroad. So it was a really nice array of options in Hawaii and the mainland US. And these can be marine related, they can be outdoor adventure, cultural study, studio art, art history, language immersion. And often students like to start with these in the fall with the most structure and support. The second category of the 4 are skill-based intensives, 1 to 4 weeks. Housing's all set up for you. You're dropping in and you're getting a lot of information fast, about a particular area of interest or a skill. So it might be, hey, I want to go off and get my wilderness EMT certification, which is a 4-week course here in the States, residential. We've had many students do. Or some of our students were getting trained to become snowboard instructors or ski instructors. We've had people who do yoga instructor courses, wilderness survival, scuba diving. I have a young man right now getting his dive master, or build a guitar, or it could be learn how to run a recording studio, or filmmaking courses, or cooking intensives, or writing courses. And because these are short, you can tuck them into gap time, either doing a gap year before college or during college, or it could be a break in college or post-college to, in a very short period of time, get a lot of information fast or a certification that you can use. So these are really useful and you're still part of a community, if not just a peer group. The next category are the internship options. These are very specific. It's hard to find these for gappers, especially in the US, because companies have to legally give you money or college credit typically, and they'd rather not pay you when they can't give you the credit because you're not in college yet. So we often are sending students out of country to Ireland, Spain, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Argentina, depending on one's level of Spanish. And students are living in shared apartments with fellow interns, and then they're engaging in a really substantive job-like placement. So this is what my stepdaughter did working for a little startup company in Dublin during her gap year. And these run 6 to 12 weeks. You pay for them, but they're well worth it for what you're getting in terms of this half step into independent living skills, the work world, checking out an area of interest you might want to pursue or not down the line. Really useful. And these can be pulled into summers as well. And then the last category, much more low cost or no cost options. These are all the volunteer work placements. So US and abroad, all different lengths of time, all ages, and definitely more rural than urban. So you could be doing disaster relief work, like I have a young woman helping to rebuild post-hurricane damage in the Caribbean right now. You could be clearing trails in national parks, as one of my students did last fall in California, with a crew of fellow volunteers for company, housing and food provided in exchange for labor, or working with animals, or on board tall ships, or working with children, and so forth. So many students will tie these in maybe later in the gap year if they feel like they want more structure and support at the start. And this is a nice transition way to do it. Or if you want to keep the costs down, you can stay with these low-cost room and board options. So this is what a year can look like. It pretty much follows the school calendar. Generally, students are doing their own thing in the summer. And then in the fall, they might start with more of a group program so that that first step out, they're connected in with peers and leaders. Excuse me. And then take a break in between, come home. Sometimes students are thinking about reapplying to colleges or applying to colleges halfway through a gap year. Normally, I'm telling them just go through the process in your senior year, ideally getting where you want to go, ask for a deferral, and you're all set. But there is this break in between where sometimes students will reapply. And then January through May, you have a nice chunk of time here, where we might be stepping into more independent placements like the internships or the skill-based options or volunteer. And then depending on what students want to do, they might finish up a gap year with free travel, with friends they've made, and they're learning from that as well. Because every moment you have to decide, what am I doing next? So you can see that progression into more and more independence as they go through a gap year. Here's what I hear from students in terms of questions and concerns. I don't want to get behind my high school class, or am I going to be too old as a college freshman landing in college? And I never mean to discount how people feel, but these don't play out the way people worry. So you're really on a parallel track. When your friends go off to college, you're stepping into a fall experience, often with peers who'd normally be in college with you. So you don't have to disconnect from a peer group. And the reality is that these students are so far ahead of their peers. Even if they graduate a year later from college, what they're bringing to the college experience and then the work world, as I was talking about, puts them way ahead of their peers. They've already taken on the world. And they tend to be more efficient students because a lot of students are spending more years in college than they're prepared for, like 5 or 6, changing majors, changing schools. That starts getting really expensive with college tuition these days as well. Now, when students land in college, they are more mature. There's no question about it. Their heads are in a different place. That can feel like a bit of a disjoint, but luckily you're not so age-bound in college. So these students can find other gap year students. They're there, join clubs, as I did. I've never had anyone say, Holly, I wish I hadn't done a gap year because I felt too old as a college student. People have said, I did feel more mature. My stepdaughter said I was the go-to person in my dorm. She said I liked it. So it depends on how you look at it. It can be a real benefit not to be quite as run by the mob, if you will, and have that level of maturity. Parents obviously going to worry about safety, doing the due diligence on program options, making sure that they've got communications with their child, and that's just the level of, however that family, where their comfort level is, and so there can be more structured options to more independent. And I talked about applying and deferring. Usually most colleges will defer you. I think a lot of colleges at this point know that they're going to get a better student out of that student after a gap year on every level. So only a few colleges won't defer. Some of the state universities don't, not that because they don't believe in a gap year, they just think it's more of a bureaucratic issue for them. And the gap year program application deadlines, they're later. It's not like applying to college. So seniors can go through the college application process in the fall and then start right now, January, February, working on their gap year plans. Some students will even wait to hear from all their colleges, in April or by April, and then make a decision about taking a gap year, ask for the deferral, and get cracking on their fall plans. And you don't have to set the whole year up in advance. You just need to start nailing down the fall. I have some students who sign up in August to start in September. Not ideal, but it is doable, just given how flexible programs often are. Oops, sorry. The budget, the scholarships. If you're on a tight budget, programs provide scholarships. Gap year counselors like us provide scholarships. You can use 529 plans if a program is accredited, But just know that many colleges will say, fine, take a gap year, we'll defer you, but don't garner credit, college credit on your gap year, or they'll only allow you a certain amount. It's college by college, so you want to check on that. But you could use the college money for the tuition for some of these programs. It's good to know and check on that. This is just our information. You know, we are an independent gap year counseling organization. Part of our mission is just to educate people about the gap year. So we have always offered a free brainstorming session. There's no obligation to work with Interim. There's a lot of information on our website, interimprograms.com. People can harvest that, you know, use it to get more information. And, you know, at this point, we've just been doing this longer than anyone. Our service is good for a lifetime. So I have alumni checking in. I've worked with alumni and their family who wanted to step back in, like do a family sabbatical. And we don't get any money from programs. So our value is that we're vetting options for people so that they know they're landing in things that are well run, and then helping with, you know, helping a student really tease out what are they interested in, what do they want to do, and then even as they change their mind through a gap year, just staying right with them all the way along. Okay, so thank you very much. And Anthony, do you have any questions for me at this point?
Yeah. The first thing is the COVID-19 pandemic. Have you seen more students now going through the gap year compared to previous years?
I would say, you know, last year I had students who had to come back early in March from programs. I had no idea how the next wave of students who started this past fall, how that was going to be. I thought it was actually going to be a really quiet year. As you can imagine, it was actually an incredibly busy year because there were so many students who didn't want to start college sitting, you know, in front of a computer or doing online classes again at home.
Do you find a certain type of student taking the gap year?
You know, it really runs the gamut. I would say this year we may have gotten more students who wouldn't have thought about doing a gap year, who would have really on a track to college right away. That's what they've been thinking about. A lot of the top colleges as well. And many of them, once they realized what they could do with their gap time and not sit in front of a computer, actually got incredibly excited about it. So it's been an interesting shift in some regard with the type of student who wouldn't maybe normally think about doing a gap year, but has this past year and really has appreciated it. Yeah.
And what type of students actually come to you and you know are asking for some type of advice from you?
I mean, you know, we work with students across the U.S. and some internationally. They're like I said, they really run the gamut. There's some students who just have had such a hard time through the formal academic process with learning differences, ADHD or dyslexia or whatever, and so they're defined by that so much of their life, and their self-confidence is really low, or they're just not happy in the academic setting. Those students are great to work with because they really come back alive on a gap year with hands-on learning experiences, playing to their strengths. I mean, I'm sure I would have been diagnosed with ADHD in high school. So for me, having a year where I could hyper-focus on, okay, marine bio, okay, now I'm going to Greece, you know, rather than all the stuff coming at me, really made a difference. It's like, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. My learning style is different. And so I need to find a way to work with that. Then you've got students who are really just not sure what they want to get at in college, or they're just tired. You know, I saw my very high-powered stepdaughter just fried by the end of her senior year. She said halfway through her fall in Italy, she's just taking Italian language classes and kind of snoozing in the afternoon. She said, you know, Holly, you're right. I had no idea how much I had on my plate. It was my normal to be that tired. She said, I've forgotten what it was like to have full vitality. Wow. So, you know, you get that type of student. And then just students who are really eager to just get out and explore. You know, they're set with the colleges. They're great students. And they're looking for something else to get at, you know, before 4 more years or more of schooling. I mean, what I always tell people is it gets harder as you get older. You know, parents always resonate with this. Most parents want to go, but it gets harder as you get older to take this kind of time. You know, and our teens and 20s are wandering years. We're not tied to much. So as far as I'm concerned, the more widely and creatively you wander and pick off these interests you have systematically one by one, you're going to have a really good beat on who you are and what you're drawn to or not. You're taking all of that into college and beyond. And it's a real missing piece. I know a lot of students who are graduating from college with a major and they still don't have a clue as to who they are, or what they want to get at. And then they have to go get a job. If they're lucky, they back their way into something that they like, but it's not a very tidy process. So, yeah.
Do you find a lot of students, you said in the summertime, they're pretty much on their own doing
Summer, yeah, generally, especially after high school, that's a summer when a lot of people are still around. They want to see their friends, especially this year because they haven't seen their friends. If they can, they will. And just work, have that downtime, help pay for the year. I worked every summer in my gap year, both summers, and just pay for all the airfare during my year, round trip Hawaii, round trip Greece. The second summer can be different because everyone's dispersed already. So students might come back and work, or they might spend part of it doing that free travel with the friends they've met. They're really independent. I mean, here's an example. I had a mother I worked with years ago, and she said, I asked my son if he wanted me to come with him to college to drop him off. He said, no, I'm fine. She said her jaw went down to the floor. He's like, he was launched. He didn't need her to take him to college. He was going to go to college. And I think that's a real shift, that independence.
So we're coming to the end of our show, and usually, like the first time, I ask my guests, what advice do you want to give to the parents and the students that are interested in doing a gap year? What do you give them?
I would say two things. One is, I think it really is important for people just to inform themselves about this option, whether you do it or not. And I firmly believe it's all about choosing. So if people come into my office and meet with me and say, hey, Holly, this all sounds great, and I choose college this fall, that makes me happy because I know they're actually choosing. They're not just going to college because it's the next step. So they're owning it. So get informed about it. There are a lot of fears that people have. There are a lot of myths about gap time. It's for people who have problems, or, you haven't gotten where you want to go, or, that's not true. What I see is this extraordinary opportunity, if you want it, to go and explore in a very practical way before you hit college. And as I said, it gets harder later to do it. You can't do it as easily post college. So yeah, so at least know what it's about, and then then see how you feel about it. And the other thing I was going to say is try not to make fear-based decisions in your life. I know that, or at least be conscious of what's driving you, because sometimes I think people don't think about that. So you might say, you know what, yep, this is a fear-based decision. I'm okay with that, and I'll make that decision. But I think in this stage of one's life, better to go towards something, than away. And I think this year particularly has been a challenge for people around that. How do I not let this pandemic run me to such a degree? How can I sensibly engage in life still, and safely? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show again, Holly. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I am quite grateful to be able to talk about this anytime. Right. So thanks again, Anthony. Okay.
So you've been watching The Secrets of College Planning. I'm your host, Anthony Uva. Until next time.